The Kethera Codex, carved into crystalline walls deep beneath the ruins of Zephyria Prime, contained only one entry about the third spiral arm's forbidden zone. A single line, repeated in 17 different ancient languages, each translation more urgent than the last. Never wake the sleeping death world. For 12,000 years, every spacefaring civilization had obeyed that warning. Ships crossed the void in wide arcs around the small blue planet, their navigation computers automatically plotting courses that avoided the entire system. Trade routes bent like light around a black hole, adding weeks to journeys rather than risk even distant proximity. The planet had no name in galactic records. No coordinates. No classification. It existed as a blank space on every star chart, marked only with the ancient symbol for forbidden territory. A circle with a line through it. Simple. Universal. Absolute. But the Hegemony was desperate. Admiral Vex'thul of the Hegemony's 7th Fleet stood before the War Council, his 4 arms spread in a gesture of reluctant submission. The holographic display behind him showed their empire's current state. Red zones spreading like cancer across formerly blue territories. Refugee camps overflowing. Military casualties climbing past sustainable levels. The Devourer Swarms have consumed 47 worlds in the past cycle, he reported, his voice carrying the weight of civilizations lost. Our projections show complete territorial collapse within 6 standard periods. We need allies. We need weapons. We need anything that can tip the balance. Chancellor Mordak, ancient even by Hegemony standards, shifted in his bio-throne. His species lived for millennia, and he had personally witnessed the rise and fall of a dozen galactic powers. The Forbidden World is not a solution, Admiral. It is a grave. Every expedition sent to investigate it has simply vanished. With respect, Chancellor, those were probe missions. Single ships. Scientific expeditions. Vex'thul's primary arms gestured to the tactical display. We're talking about a full military contact protocol. First strike capability. If there's a weapons cache on that world, if there's technology that could stop the Devourers. If there's something that could destroy us all, interrupted Counselor Yasmin, her psychic tendrils writhing with anxiety. Her species could sense emotional resonance across vast distances, and something about the death world made her entire nervous system recoil. The warnings exist for a reason. Civilizations far older and wiser than ours marked that place as untouchable. But desperation breeds foolishness, and the Hegemony had run out of rational options. The vote was close. 7 for investigation, 5 against, 3 abstaining. Admiral Vex'thul received his authorization with the weight of 16 world survival on his shoulders. The expedition fleet was the largest military force the Hegemony had assembled in 3 centuries. 50 warships, ranging from fast attack corvettes to the massive dreadnought Eternal Might. Support vessels carried the finest xenoarchaeologists, linguists, and combat specialists money could buy. If something on the death world could save them, they would find it. The journey took 18 days, hyperspace jumps carrying them deeper into the forbidden zone than any Hegemony vessel had ever traveled. As they approached the target system, long-range sensors began picking up anomalies. The star was wrong. Too stable, too consistent, as if something was regulating its fusion processes. The planets orbited in perfect mathematical harmony, their gravitational dance too precise to be natural. And the third planet, the one marked in the ancient warnings, glowed with an energy signature that made no sense. Not radioactive. Not thermal. Something else entirely. Something that resonated with frequencies their equipment couldn't properly measure. Distance to target? Vex'thul asked from the command bridge of the Eternal Might. 12 million kilometers and closing, reported Commander Taresh. Her cybernetic implants flickered as she processed the sensor data. Admiral, the energy readings are unprecedented. It's like the entire planet is humming with contained power. Through the bridge's main viewport, the death world grew larger. Blue and green swirled with white, a perfect sphere of water and land that should have been paradise. No signs of industrial civilization. No orbital structures. No defensive platforms. Just a silent, beautiful world that somehow felt like a loaded weapon pointed at their hearts. "Launch the probe swarm," Vex'thul ordered. "I want detailed scans of the surface. Look for ruins, technology, anything that explains why this place is marked as forbidden." The probes descended through the planet's atmosphere like metal rain. High-definition cameras captured images of vast continents covered in green vegetation, expansive oceans that sparkled under a warm sun, and weather patterns that seemed too regular to be entirely natural. But no cities. No structures. No signs of advanced civilization. Then the probes went silent. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Simply, offline. All communication ceased simultaneously across the entire planet's surface, as if something had reached out and gently switched them off. "Analysis?" Vex'thul demanded. Commander Taresh's secondary arms worked frantically across her control surfaces. "Unknown interference pattern, Admiral." The signals didn't degrade or fade. They just stopped. Like the probes encountered something that absorbed their communications entirely. "Weapons systems online," Vex'thul ordered. "Shields to maximum. Launch a second wave of probes, this time with hardened communication arrays." But before the second wave could deploy, something changed on the planet below. The energy signature they'd been detecting suddenly spiked, climbing beyond their instruments' ability to measure. And then, without warning, it spoke. The voice came from everywhere at once. Not through their communication systems, but somehow directly into their minds. Every being on every ship in the fleet heard it simultaneously, translated automatically into their native language, carrying emotions and concepts that bypassed normal linguistic processing. "You have awakened us," the words carried undertones of vast age, of patience measured in geological epochs, of power constrained by choice rather than limitation. And underneath it all, something that made Admiral Vex'thul's species-specific danger instincts scream warnings at a frequency that hurt to contemplate. "We have slept for 10,000 of your years, dreaming the dreams of stars dying and being born. We have watched your civilizations rise like flowers and wither like flames. We have seen the Devourer Swarms consume worlds beyond counting, and we have chosen to remain silent." On the planet's surface, something was happening. The probe cameras, before going offline, had captured images of the ground beginning to glow. Not with heat or radiation, but with something that looked almost organic. As if the planet itself was awakening from a deep sleep. "But you have come here despite the warnings. You have touched our world with your metal seeds and disturbed our rest. Now you must choose." The energy reading spiked again, and every ship in the fleet suddenly found their weapon systems offline. Not damaged. Not destroyed. Simply deactivated, as if something had reached across space and politely asked them to put their guns down. "Admiral," Commander Taresh whispered, her voice tight with barely controlled terror. "I'm reading massive energy buildups across the planet's surface. Whatever's down there, it's been holding back power on a scale I can't even calculate." Vex'thul found his voice, though it came out smaller than he intended. "This is Admiral Vex'thul of the Hegemony 7th Fleet. We come seeking alliance against the Devourer Swarms. Our worlds are dying. Our people face extinction. We know. We have watched the Devourers consume your territories like acid eating through metal. We have seen your fleets break against their endless hunger. We have observed your civilization's final desperate gamble in coming here." The voice paused, and in that silence, something extraordinary happened. The planet's surface began to change. What had appeared to be natural continents and oceans started shifting, revealing themselves as camouflage structures of impossible size. Cities that spanned entire continents. Orbital platforms disguised as clouds. Defensive installations that had been masquerading as mountain ranges. The death world wasn't dead. It was sleeping. And it was waking up. We are humanity. We are the species your ancestors marked as forbidden not because we are evil, but because we are dangerous. We are the ones who ended the last great galactic war by making it too terrible for anyone to want to continue fighting. Images began appearing in their minds. Not transmitted through any technology they could detect, but somehow projected directly into their consciousness. Visions of space battles on a scale that dwarfed anything in recorded history. Fleets numbering in the millions. Weapons that could sterilize entire solar systems. And at the center of it all, ships marked with a simple symbol, a blue sphere crossed by white lines. Earth. Humanity. The sleeping giants of the third spiral arm. 10,000 years ago, we chose to withdraw. Not from weakness, but from wisdom. We had become too powerful, too destructive. Our wars threatened to tear the galaxy apart. So we retreated to our homeworld, sealed ourselves away, and let the universe forget us. We became a cautionary tale. A warning. A reminder that some powers are too dangerous to wake. Admiral Vex'thul felt his resolve cracking like overstressed metal. The Hegemony had come here seeking weapons to fight the Devourers, but they had found something far more terrifying than their enemies. They had found the civilization that their oldest legends spoke of in whispers. The ones who had fought wars so brutal that surviving species had agreed never to speak their name aloud. But you have awakened us. And the choice now falls to you. We can destroy the Devourer Swarms. We can save your worlds. We can preserve your civilizations. But the cost is that we return to the galaxy. We take our place among the stars again. And the universe must live with the consequences of that choice. The planet's transformation continued. What they had mistaken for continents revealed themselves as massive shipyards, containing vessels that made their dreadnoughts look like children's toys. Manufacturing facilities that could produce fleets faster than their economies could count them. Defensive systems that turned the entire planet into a fortress capable of holding off armadas. And the people. As the camouflage fields dropped, they could see them. Billions of humans, living in cities that defied physics, working with technologies that seemed like magic. They looked small, fragile, almost delicate compared to the massive Hegemony species. But there was something in their movements, something in the way they carried themselves, that spoke of absolute confidence. These were not a species that had ever learned to fear anything in the universe. We offer you a bargain, the voice continued. We will save your worlds from the Devourers. We will preserve your species. We will ensure your survival. But in return, you must accept that humanity has returned to galactic civilization. You must live with what that means. Commander Taresh leaned close to Admiral Vex'thul, her cybernetic implant sparking with overload as they tried to process the data flowing from the planet below. Admiral, the energy signatures I'm reading, if they weaponized even a fraction of what's down there, they could sterilize the entire Devourer swarm in a matter of days. Maybe hours. Vex'thul stared at the planet, watching massive structures rise from what he had thought was ocean floor. Shipyards the size of small moons. Weapons platforms that made their most powerful cannons look like throwing stones. And everywhere, the quiet, efficient movement of a species that had spent 10,000 years preparing for this moment. The choice was simple. Accept humanity's return and save their civilizations, or refuse and watch their worlds burn under the Devourer assault. But simple didn't mean easy. Because the legends were clear about what humanity was capable of when roused to action. And those legends were written by the survivors. What guarantee do we have, Vex'thul asked, his voice barely above a whisper, that you won't become a threat to us as well? None, the response was immediate and honest. We offer no guarantees. We make no promises about our future behavior. We simply present you with reality. The Devourers will destroy your worlds within 6 standard periods. We can prevent that. But we cannot do so while remaining hidden. The choice is yours. In the silence that followed, Vex'thul could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. 16 worlds. Trillions of lives. The accumulated knowledge and culture of the Hegemony's thousand-year empire. All of it balanced against the risk of awakening something that their ancestors had been wise enough to leave sleeping. But desperation makes philosophers of soldiers, and Vex'thul had run out of alternatives. "We accept," he said, the words feeling like a death sentence and a salvation simultaneously. The response was immediate. Across the planet's surface, structures that had been hidden for millennia began emerging into the light of their star. Shipyards that spanned continents activated with the hum of industry that had been dormant for geological ages. And from deep space, energy signatures began appearing as long-dormant monitoring stations came online throughout the spiral arm. Then it begins, the first human ships launched 6 hours later. They weren't the massive dreadnoughts that Admiral Vex'thul had expected, but smaller, more elegant vessels that moved with a fluid grace no Hegemony ship could match. Their hulls were seamless, apparently forged from materials that bent light around them like water. No visible weapons ports, no obvious defensive systems, just smooth perfection that somehow radiated menace. The lead ship approached the eternal might with movements that defied physics as Vex'thul understood it. No thruster burns, no gravitational wake, just smooth acceleration and deceleration that suggested mastery of forces the Hegemony hadn't even theorized about. "Prepare to receive our representative," came the voice, and suddenly a figure materialized on the bridge. Not transported, not teleported, but simply, assembled from light and energy into solid matter. She appeared human, though Admiral Vex'thul had never seen a living member of the species before. Smaller than he'd expected, with pale skin and dark hair that seemed to move in a non-existent breeze. Her eyes held the weight of ages, and when she smiled, it was the expression of someone who had seen civilizations rise and fall like seasons changing. "I am Sarah Chen," she said, her voice carrying the same impossible translation effect as the planetary consciousness had. "I speak for humanity. We've been monitoring your situation with the Devourer Swarms. It's concerning." Vex'thul found himself struggling to maintain military protocol in the face of technology that casually violated every law of physics he understood. "Our forces have been unable to halt their advance. They consume everything in their path. Worlds, ships, even stellar matter. They're unlike any enemy we've ever encountered." Sarah nodded, her expression growing thoughtful. "Yes, we've observed their feeding patterns. Fascinating organisms, actually. They evolved in the intergalactic void, learning to consume any form of organized matter for sustenance. They're not evil, Admiral. They're simply hungry. And unfortunately for your civilizations, you represent the richest feeding ground they've encountered in several million years." The casual way she discussed the extinction of entire species made Vex'thul's blood run cold. But there was something else in her tone, something that suggested solutions where his military mind could see only inevitable defeat. "Can they be stopped?" he asked. "Oh yes," Sarah replied, and her smile took on an edge that made every survival instinct Vex'thul possessed scream warnings. "They can be stopped quite easily, actually. The question isn't whether we can destroy them. The question is whether we should." Before Vex'thul could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. Commander Taresha's voice cut through the noise with barely controlled panic. "Admiral. Massive Devourer formation dropping out of hyperspace. Bearing 27 Mark IV, distance 8 million kilometers and closing fast." Through the bridge viewport, Vex'thul could see them. The Devourer Swarms stretched across space like a living nebula, their bioships pulsing with organic light as they detected the presence of organized matter to consume. Millions of them, ranging from fighters the size of shuttles to massive worldships that could crack planets like eggs. "Battle stations." Vex'thul ordered, then stopped as he remembered their weapons were still offline. "Sarah, our defensive systems are unnecessary," she finished calmly. "Observe." The human ships moved with liquid grace, positioning themselves between the Hegemony fleet and the approaching swarm. They were outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1, tiny sparks of metal facing a tide of hungry biological destruction that had consumed 47 worlds. Then they opened fire. What emerged from the human vessels wasn't energy beams or projectile weapons, but something that looked like controlled tears in space itself. Reality seemed to bend and fold around the Devourer formation, and where those spatial distortions touched the bioships, they simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but edited out of the universe as if they had never been. The swarm's response was immediate and terrifying. Millions of bioships accelerated toward the human formation, their organic hulls pulsing with energy patterns that could dissolve molecular bonds on contact. They moved with the coordinated precision of a single organism, which in many ways they were. But the humans were ready. Space around the human ships began to change. The laws of physics bent like heated metal, creating pockets where different rules applied. Devourer bioships found themselves moving backward through time, aging millions of years in seconds. Others discovered that their mass had suddenly become negative, causing them to repel everything they tried to consume. Still others found themselves existing in dimensions that human science had folded out of normal spacetime. It wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration of power so absolute that it redefined what warfare could mean. Within minutes, the swarm that had taken months to assemble was gone. Not retreating, not regrouping, simply no longer existing in any meaningful sense. The few survivors fled back into hyperspace with the desperate speed of prey that had encountered an apex predator. Sarah turned back to Admiral Vex'thul, who was staring at the empty space where millions of enemy vessels had been moments before. As I said, stopping them is quite easy. The challenge is doing so without fundamentally altering the balance of power in this galaxy. Vex'thul struggled to find words for what he had witnessed. How many ships do you have? Currently active? About 12,000. Sarah's casual tone suggested she was discussing the weather. In reserve? Several million. In production? We can manufacture approximately 50,000 vessels per standard day when operating at full capacity. The numbers were incomprehensible. The Hegemony's entire military force consisted of roughly 8,000 ships, built over centuries of industrial development. Humanity could apparently produce more warships in a single day than the Hegemony had constructed in its entire existence. Why? Vex'thul asked. Why build such a fleet if you intended to remain hidden? Sarah's expression grew distant, as if she were looking at something far beyond the bridge walls. Because we learned something during our last war, Admiral. We learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of overwhelming force in the hands of those wise enough not to use it unless absolutely necessary. She gestured toward the planet below, where the massive structures continued their patient emergence from camouflage. For 10,000 years, we've been the galaxy's insurance policy. The option of last resort. We've watched civilizations rise and fall, conflicts bloom and fade, always ready to intervene if something threatened to upset the fundamental balance. And the Devourers represent such a threat. The Devourers represent hunger without wisdom. Growth without restraint. They would consume this entire galaxy, then move on to the next, and the next, until the universe was nothing but empty void and scattered particles. Sarah's voice carried a weight of absolute conviction. We cannot allow that. Commander Taresh approached them, her cybernetic implant still sparking from the data overload of witnessing technology that shouldn't exist. Ma'am, we're receiving communications from across Hegemony space. The Devourer formations attacking our worlds have stopped. They're withdrawing from every active engagement. Sarah nodded as if this were expected. Word travels fast among hive minds. They've realized that continuing their advance would bring them into direct conflict with humanity. They're making the rational choice. Will they return? Vex'thul asked. Eventually. Hunger is their nature, and this galaxy represents too rich a prize to abandon forever. But not for several thousand years, at minimum. They'll retreat to the void, explore other feeding grounds, perhaps evolve new strategies. By the time they return, the situation may be very different. Admiral Vex'thul felt a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying begin to lift from his shoulders. His worlds were safe. His people would survive. The hegemony would endure. But the price was accepting that everything had changed. "What happens now?" he asked. Sarah's smile returned, but it was different now. Less mysterious, more genuinely friendly. "Now, Admiral, you return to your worlds and tell your leaders that humanity has returned to galactic civilization. We'll be establishing diplomatic relations, reopening trade routes, and taking our place among the community of spacefaring species. And if some civilizations object to your return, they're welcome to their objections," Sarah replied. "We've never forced anyone to like us, Admiral. We've simply made it clear that attempting to destroy us is inadvisable." As if to emphasize her point, the space around Earth continued to reveal its secrets. Orbital installations emerged from stealth fields that had hidden them for millennia. Manufacturing platforms that could reshape asteroids into starships. Research stations where humanity had spent 10,000 years refining sciences that other species hadn't dreamed of. And everywhere, the quiet confidence of a species that had mastered not just the physical universe, but the wisdom to know when their power should be used and when it should remain sheathed. The journey back to Hegemony space took 18 days, the same as the trip out. But everything was different now. The universe had fundamentally changed, not because of conquest or destruction, but because a sleeping giant had chosen to wake up. Admiral Vex'thul spent those 18 days writing reports that he knew no one would believe until the evidence became undeniable. How do you explain to a galactic civilization that their oldest nightmares and their greatest salvation were the same species? How do you describe power so absolute that it made warfare itself seem quaint? But the proof was waiting when they arrived home. The Devourer Swarms had withdrawn completely, leaving behind empty space where thriving colonies had been preparing for their final stands. Across Hegemony territory, the silence where screams had been expected told its own story. And in the depths of space, new signals were beginning to appear on long-range sensors. Ships marked with the blue sphere and white lines. Humanity's ambassadors, scientists, and traders, carefully reintroducing themselves to a galaxy that had spent 10,000 years trying to forget they existed. The Kethera Codex would need updating. The ancient warning about never waking the sleeping death world would have to be revised. Because the death world was awake now, and it had chosen to be something far more dangerous than a destroyer. It had chosen to be a protector. And the universe would have to learn to live with the consequences of that choice. In the weeks that followed, as diplomatic relations slowly established themselves and trade agreements were carefully negotiated, one truth became clear to every spacefaring civilization: humanity hadn't returned to the galaxy as conquerors or destroyers. They had returned as gardeners. And they intended to make sure their garden grew properly this time. The sleeping giants were awake, and the universe would never be the same.